Ahoy, and welcome back to
Oh,
Titanic
wait.
Talkline.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry. I hit my
that's
my
okay.
microphone, so I didn't, in case you heard that, I
I
wasn't.
actually didn't hear it at all, but also so anyone who can not see this, I have a pop filter on my microphone. And every time I talk to someone who's like remotely into audio engineering, they're like, you don't actually need that. And I'm like, I know I don't need it for audio, but I punch the air so often. I need like a barrier between me and the actual microphone before I like accidentally hit something really hard. I do that all the time,
So is this
but
going to be in it, or will you cut this out and then start after?
it might stay in. Depends on how I feel about everything. But I am Alexia, your host for Titanic Talkline, and I'm excited this week because I have the host of one of my favorite shows, who I basically annoyed into coming on, but I'm really grateful to have her here. I have oh my gosh, Brittany Butler from the Titanic Scene by Scene podcast. Hello.
Hi. Sorry for like potentially ruining the beginning of this episode.
I think that the only person that ruins beginnings of episodes is me. So don't worry about it. How are you doing? You're doing all right?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's apparently cedar season in Texas, which I guess means that I'm dying because of there's pollen outside. But other than that, I think we're all right. Sorry. So I know for anyone who hasn't listened to your show, I have more than once. What is your Titanic story? Please tell everyone.
Um, so basically I was 5 years old. And my mom came home from seeing the movie in theaters. I was at home with a babysitter. And it's crazy how you remember everything, right?
Right.
When it's like a big moment in your life, you just remember. So I was at home with a babysitter, and my mom came home and she was still crying. Uh, and I was so concerned. I was a concerned 5-year-old. I just remember her. Like she came walking in the door and like she had her bag, her pocketbook around her shoulder, and she just came in very somber. And she was just looking down and she just started crying a little bit again. And I run over and I was like, Mom, Mommy, like, what's wrong? And she just said, the movie was so good. And I was just immediately enthralled and intrigued. I was like, what movie? Can I see it? What is it? And she's just like, it was Titanic. Oh, but no, you can't see it. You can't see it. And that's like the wrong thing to tell a child. You
Always,
can't tell a child they can't see something, because now I'm just going to obsess over it and ask over and over until I can see it.
as you should.
Mm-hmm. So eventually, uh, when it came out on VHS, my grandparents and my mom, obviously, they got
Sure.
a copy of it for me. And they just said, okay, here you go. Like, we'll watch it with you. And that was it. I was absolutely obsessed. I can't remember the very first time I watched it, though. Like, obviously, I remember we watched it together,
Mhm.
probably. They didn't just let me run away and watch it myself. They might have. I mean, I really don't remember. I just remember I saw it at some point for the first time, obviously, and
It's a
just
pretty
became
great
obsessed.
visual of like an 8-year-old stealing a VHS tape and disappearing down a dark hallway.
A 5-year-old, a five
Five.
year
Oh,
old.
that's right. Wow, you already mentioned that. Just vanishing away, a kindergartner. Bye.
Nope. But I definitely remember mostly watching it at my grandparents' house and just crying every single time, just as a little kid, and my grandmother just kind of laughing at me and just not getting it. She's like, "Oh my God, she cries every time." And I just remember laying on the couch being like, "I can't help it. It's just so sad." And I
I
just was obsessed. I don't know what it was, but I just wanted to keep watching it over and over and over again, even though it destroyed my little heart.
I you, that's interesting because I don't remember getting beginning to get like properly emotional at films until way later in my life. I'm like impressed by the ability to emotionally comprehend that because I remember my own first viewing of Titanic being confused by a
Hmm.
lot of the super dramatic is a weird way to say it, but the impactful scenes, I guess, because I hadn't been exposed to some of the themes yet. Like I
Hmm.
had never dealt with a suicide, for example.
Right.
So I just did not understand the Murdoch plot, for example, because I was like, why in the hell would someone take their own level? What, that doesn't make any sense. What possible motivate, like that's more of what I mean, is like I think I was just too emotionally unintelligent to comprehend why I should even be sad. I'm impressed with your ability to comprehend that at 5.
Oh, thank you. I know it's funny. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, I don't know. I can't remember a time where I didn't get it, like at least on a basic level that a kid would understand it on, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, I always like I'm trying to think back to like certain points that might be that way, like certain points where you may need to wait to be a little older to understand, but I don't know. Like I feel like I always kind of like I first started thinking of the ending, like
Mm-hmm.
as a 5-year old, I was like, oh, she died. Like I was like, oh, like you know what I mean? I was like, oh, she died, an old woman, like in her bed, like Jack said. Like I already was like, I don't know. I just that was just stuff I paid very close attention, I guess. I don't know, but
But I think that's really interesting. Just it shows you how everyone processes things. Because I saw the movie when I was 7, so I guess I'm a couple years old, 7 or 8. So I'm a few years older.
Mhm.
And like I said, I remember my first watching being confused by certain things, or else just scared, just
Mm.
not understanding what was happening, and then being scared of it. Like there's one scene, I don't think you've gotten there in the podcast yet, but it is um it's a scene, it's a blink and you miss it. There's a first class woman, her body is floating
Mm.
underwater in front of the first class, one of the domes. And that image was seared into my brain as a 7 or 8 year old. But I didn't have the only feeling I had about it was just that scared. That was it. There wasn't any sadness for her, I don't think. There wasn't any more complex feeling. It was just like, that's not good. And that was the end of it. But I did find it scary.
Right. Yeah,
Ugh.
it's weird. I can't really remember or think of a time when I was scared of Titanic. It was maybe I was just a really weird kid. I don't know. I was
I
a
don't think so.
morbid kid. Like
I was weird in the different direction. Like I got scared at The Nightmare Before Christmas, not for a really long time into that movie, but I think like 2/3 or like 3/4 of the way in, when all the haunted toys are being distributed to the children,
Mhm.
and dogs, there is a scary duck with teeth. And I had a rubber duck that was my favorite toy. And seeing that was very upsetting to me. And I ran out of the theater because it was upsetting. Like, I made it all the way there.
Oh
I
no.
made it all the way through a bunch of other stuff. And it was fine. But, I hit that one moment. I was like, nope.
Not the
I
rubber
was
duck.
not the rubber duck indeed. I was absolutely gone from the theater. But I also remember watching other movies and being fine by them. So that just tells kids are weird, I think, is where I'm going with this thing. Is what sticks out to kids is odd. And I think, like I said, I'm impressed that a movie like Titanic was able to make an impression and stay. Because again, a lot of the things you see when you're kids, you kind of just move on from them.
Well, because I think it was my first real movie that I watched, and I was aware of that going into it, I think, because I just watched Nickelodeon and kids stuff until then. I was only 5.
Yeah.
So by the time I watched Titanic, it was a big deal in my head because I knew
Yeah.
that my mom had already seen it and that it affected her in some way. So I knew it was some sort of big deal. And so I just made sure I just really paid attention. Because I must have been so excited about it. Um, but I do clearly remember, I don't know if it was after the first time I watched it or maybe like the second or third time, but I do clearly remember exclaiming, I was like, this is going to be my favorite movie forever.
And
Like
it
I
was.
remember, I remember, yeah, and it was. It
It
really
really
was.
was.
Yeah, it was. It really was. Yep.
uh I'm fast forwarding a lot, and I'm gonna go back to like the middle intermediate history, but like making a podcast is not easy.
Hmm.
It requires a lot of time and effort, and I imagine especially when you have, Ethan's your co-host, and you actually have to coordinate two separate people's schedules. So that becomes a whole thing. So what made you want to create a podcast about a very long movie that people love and have seen a lot? and have a lot of feelings about.
Yeah, so I got because me and Ethan, we already hosted we hosted a podcast together already
Mm-hmm.
about a TV show, and then I guess I had started after we started actually, creating a podcast, I started listening to podcasts more. And so I was like, okay, so what other podcasts are out there? I'm sure there's, there's always something tailored to your interests. So I searched for Titanic and I listened to a bunch of one-off episodes of movie podcasts, like just their episodes on Titanic.
Oh, yeah,
And,
yeah.
and at the time, so this was like 2019 maybe, or late 2018. And at the time, all of the episodes I found just did not get Titanic. They just didn't get it. They
They
didn't
didn't let
get
it
it.
in.
They didn't. They never let it in. Um they just didn't, and it was really bothering me, and I listened to so many different ones,
Mm-hmm.
and just all the ones I had come across were just very cynical takes. They were just people who just didn't understand the movie on the level that I know us fans understand it. And I was getting very upset because I couldn't seem to find anyone who, would point out the things that I would think of, or point out things that other people might have noticed, or just, common known things that we know. And so
Right.
it was just annoying listening to all of this. And at the time, I don't remember um any podcast existing like this, because if it did, I would have been listening to that instead of trying to make one myself.
Sure.
But I think there was the Titanic Minute one, and
Yes.
that one's like crazy though. So I was like, okay, can't do that, obviously, and that's not something I would ever do anyway. But I was like, what's another thing that could be similar, or like I just got the
Mm-hmm.
idea that I was like, well, why not go scene by scene? Not minute by minute, but like maybe scene by scene, because that way we can really discuss everything there is to discuss, and there's still going to be stuff to discuss even when we're done.
Sure.
But it just seemed like that would maybe be a cool idea, because I had done a Titanic like video essay basically on my YouTube side channel for the
Nice.
20th anniversary. It was like it was called Titanic 20 Years Later, a discussion, review, and defense, because at the time people were still being annoying about Titanic. Um, and so I did this
You say that as
really,
though that stopped.
oh yeah, well, this 25th anniversary helped a bit, I will say.
That's true.
But yeah, so I I did this really long video where I tried to get all of my Titanic thoughts out, but it's a never-ending, endless pit. So I said, why don't I just try a podcast doing this? And I had no idea how it was gonna go. Like, I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
had no idea how it was gonna do. Um,
Sure.
the podcast we had at the time was for such a niche show. It was like a childhood show that only a very finite amount of people cared about. And our audience was very small but mighty for what the subject was. So I was used to like a strong, small, dedicated group of people who would listen.
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, with Titanic, it's Titanic, and I should have expected that it might have done a little better, but at the time it was a side project to our side project. And so, you know what I mean? So I wasn't really expecting much. And then it just took off like organically, like on its own, just people searching for Titanic, I guess. I don't know. And people just came across it. And now it's kind of, at this point at least, I'd say it's kind of our main podcast, because we've taken a long, long break from the other one. But
Would you say that the audience for the related things is Titanic size?
oh, this is great. Uh,
Uh,
yes, yes, I would.
I think that even surprised me because so my show only started a little under a year ago. So this
Mm,
is 2022, which means post pandemic and also sort of reapproaching this 25th anniversary wave, the buildup. And by that time, there was a handful more of podcasts. There was your show. Titanic Minute had completed by that
Mhm.
time, which if you haven't listened to it, you're right. It is absolutely crazy, but it is hilarious in a way that is very hard to describe. It's nonsense that's Titanic themed. It's great. And then I think there was a limited series called something along the lines of Titanic Voices. And there's also Unsinkable, the Titanic podcast, Time to Talk Titanic, Titanic. I'm forgetting the rest. But by that time, when I was coming up with a show or coming up with an idea, there was so many. And it was surprising to me that not only were there so many, but there was room for more.
Right.
It's like the desire is insatiable for Titanic content.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me,
I don't know.
sorry.
I had thought the same thing. Yeah. Because like
When
with our other one, if they're like the cast of that show just started
mhm.
their own podcast for it. And I was like, okay,
Oh,
so no
cool.
one really needs ours anymore because we were the only
Oh,
one. We were literally the only one.
you were the
So
first.
we
Cast
were,
came
we
second.
were.
Cast came second. But
Uh,
but I like I can see where in certain groups oversaturation is a concern because I'm thinking about certain things. I play roller derby
I was
as
gonna
a side
say
hobby.
actually, I was looking at your Instagram and I saw that. I used to love roller derby. I always wanted to
Nice.
play.
You still
Always.
should.
I still have my quad skates and everything that I bought
You
from
should go.
back when I was younger. But
I'm not gonna out where your city is, but I happen to know that there is a league
oh,
there.
I know. There's Boston.
Yeah.
I've said I'm from Boston. Yeah, I
Oh
know
yeah.
there's
Okay.
Boston roller derby. I've gone to like I went to a bout before.
Mhm.
I went to they did there's like this Donna Summer disco roller skate thing they do
Oh, that's pretty
sometimes, and
awesome.
they're there, and I've
Nice.
met them there before, and I had kind of like a whip it moment where I was like, "You guys are so cool," and they were like, "You should try out,"
You
and I was
should.
like, "Yeah." I don't know,
I,
I'm not athletic enough for that, but
so obviously, as someone who plays, and I obviously happen to think that everyone can do it, I firmly believe that. However, I am also reasonable, and if you're like, no, I don't want to do that, or no, I'm afraid, that's reasonable. I'm not going to force you. But if it's something you want to try, whether it's roller derby or whatever the hell it is, like as long as it's safe, I say go ahead and try it. If you're saying to me, hey, I would like to try heroin, I'm not going to endorse that. That's a really dangerous idea, and we're not going to do that. Roller derby, yes, but um, you should try it. Go to anyone who's listening if you're interested. Don't just go like to a thing. Find your local league. Find a recruitment night. They'll teach you everything. But oh, I had a point. The original point I was going to make was Derby is reasonably small. So I can see where after a while, if everyone was having a podcast within roller derby, it would become oversaturated extremely quickly.
Mm.
It's still a very small community. It's growing, but we're not quite there yet. It's not like the NFL where you can have an infinite number of podcasts and nobody cares. But I think that that is one cool thing about Titanic, where it's like we haven't quite reached that point where everyone's like, "There's just too many. There's just you can't have that." Like there's other shows that I'm a couple that I can think of in the Titanic world that are kind of talk show based, and it's like there's room for more than one angle of this discussion, and it's also what I think makes it popular as a movie to discuss, like as you mentioned, on a bunch of different kinds of movie podcast because it covers a bunch of genres and criteria.
Mhm.
Maybe not
Yep.
horror.
I've actually, with this 25-year release, I've seen people saying it definitely does cover horror. I've seen people say there's like just certain moments that could be just straight up horror for some people. And once I realized that, I was like, yeah, like all the screams and just some of the visual stuff. And yeah.
Could be a lot.
Hmm.
The second half of the movie is intense in a way that's very hard to describe, I think, because it's very realistic in its depiction. You know, I've seen, for example, I remember going to go see, we got free tickets to see one of the Final Destination movies. I don't
Oh,
remember.
I love those movies.
I have a love-hate relationship with them because I can handle because they're so ridiculously bonkers.
They are.
We saw the one, I don't remember which number it was, but it was one with a roller
That's
coaster.
my favorite one. That's Final
Okay.
Destination 3.
Okay, it's number three. I can handle everything in that movie until the two girls in the tanning bed. That I just
Right.
can't. When you If you're squeamish, cover your ears. But it literally just shows for a second like their skin blistering up and bump. And to me, that was too much. I was just like,
Mm.
I'm gonna be sick. I might actually die. But there was other moments in that were just so comedically wild. Like the girl who basically trips backwards into a nail gun.
Yep.
It's like, okay, well, that is that is just nuts. And that's the level of like cartoony violence where you're kind of almost like, what was that? That is not James Cameron's Titanic.
No.
No, nobody trips headfirst into a china cabinet. That's not this movie.
No.
It'd be a really weird movie if it did.
That's
But I
funny though that you mentioned Final Destination. But
I
yeah, I have a weird
there's
soft spot for those movies.
they're just so
Except for
weird.
the fourth one and the second one. I'm not too crazy about those, but
Did they just have like weirder, like not as interesting plots,
yeah,
premises?
like the fourth one was just bad. Like I don't know
Oh.
what was wrong with that one. Like everything about it was just terrible. And then the second one just wasn't, something about it just wasn't as interesting to me. But yeah.
So I've never seen any of the other ones, but I have heard from the general chatter sphere that three is abundantly popular.
Yeah, I didn't realize that either, but I think because that was actually the first one I saw, and then I just really liked it as a movie on its own, and then I went back and watched the other ones. But yeah.
It was again, it was just so wild. I hadn't seen any of the other ones. I haven't seen any other, and that was the first one I saw. But I just remember again being in the theater and just being like, this is bonkers.
And you know what's funny? Because I'm not a big horror movie person either, but one of
Hmm.
the reasons why I like Final Destination and why it actually scares me so much is because the villain in that movie is death itself.
Yeah.
And that is something that I guess could almost tie into Titanic and me being a weird 5-year-old who was like drawn into this movie, like that's literally about dying and like life and death and all this stuff. That's just always been something that's, I don't know, that's just always struck me for as long as I can remember, just the concept of life and death. And so I feel like for a horror movie franchise where death is literally the villain, it kind of makes sense that I would be drawn to that. And then even like with Titanic, it's almost like death is the villain in Titanic as well. It's not the iceberg, it's not the ship, it's just fate.
Hmm.
It's just this crazy thing that happened.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, it's kind of weird, but
I don't think that's weird. I actually think it makes a lot of sense because it's one thing, it's the whole concept of putting a name to something. Like once you name it, it's harder to be scared of it. I mean, I think that's a pretty common trope when you have a kid in a horror movie. It's like, well, why don't we give it a name? And that way it won't be so scary once we're calling it Gary or whatever. And it kind of does make sense where it's like, oh, it's not some vague entity. It's the Babadook. It's got a name or whatever it is. And you can name death as many times as you want to, but there's no way to make it less terrifying as a concept because
Mhm.
it is inevitable.
Yep, that's exactly it.
It's interesting. And it's interesting now that I'm rethinking the Final Destination movies too, because if anyone hasn't seen them, I'm assuming the premise is basically the same, is that it starts with some horrifying montage where some person, a chosen person, sees how everyone in a scenario is going to die.
Yeah, like there's like a horrific accident of some kind.
Yeah. Like we mentioned the roller coaster. They're on the ride and the girl sees that if they go on this ride, they're all going to die, every single one of them. So she calls the stops, they all get out, and then because they escape death that minute, the clock just starts ticking on them for the rest of the film and there's no way out.
Hmm. And
And I
of course everyone
mhm.
has to die in very gruesomely ridiculous ways.
Oh yes, nobody just like has a heart attack or anything. You don't get out of it that easily. You have to climb into a tanning bed after you snuck in a smoothie you shouldn't have that melts on the heating mechanism. And
Yep.
it overheats while you're stuck inside because the sunscreen tube, I'm remembering all these details randomly, that we're
Yep.
using to prop open the door squeezed out some of its contents and now the owner can't get back in and he just watches you burn to death from outside.
Yep. That's it. There's just always, it's death is an actual thing that's working its magic just to kill you because you should have died that first time.
But I
It's
find
crazy.
that it is a super interesting concept because everything, not everything else, but there's so many other narrative threads that are the concept of cheating death or the, oh my gosh, did you see that? I almost got hit by that car and I didn't. And there's that element of, my goodness, it's used as a way to renew people's, vigor in narrative threads a lot. But in these movies, it's just enjoy it while it lasts, because it won't.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because thinking about it that way, it's like Titanic is almost a Final Destination movie because we start it with that simulation that Lewis shows us of everyone,
Right.
of everyone, and then no matter what happens until the end of the movie, we are just destined to see that entire thing play out.
Right.
And every time knowing that, when I see them approaching that iceberg, I just saw it again in the theaters, and every single time I'm like, but what if they miss it?
Yeah.
What if they
It's
go
not
back?
even just, but what if they miss it? But it's just every single time I feel the tension,
Yes.
which is amazing. And it has to do with the score. And I think we talked about that in our episode about that scene, but everything about it, just the score is so perfect. The way it's like it's building. It's the dun 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 dun
Mm-hmm.
that thing. It's like you're just like waiting. But then when it actually strikes, it's just like solo violins and just very, very just like very quiet. And there's something about that that I've always liked as well, which is just like it doesn't erupt into this big moment. It's just this subtle moment because that's kind of what it was like for most people on the ship. Like they didn't really know what was going on, so it shouldn't be this big, you know what I mean? So
At least
it's
not all
just
the time.
yeah,
Because, as you pointed out, not everyone on the ship was affected by it. But I like that you mentioned the violins because when we think about like orchestral scores, I think that a lot of big moments, like I'm thinking right away of like the Avengers Assemble sound,
mm-hmm.
the Star Wars theme. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of brass. It's very heavy brass. Brass is very associated with moments of drama because they're loud. They're
Yeah.
effortlessly loud. They're effortlessly bombastic. In the same way that if you hit a timpani, that thing's just boom.
Mm-hmm.
It's just very explosive. However, for such an interestingly, quote unquote, exciting, intense moment, it is violins and violas doing very quick, tense runs. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't sound like a lot, but I play violin, and just knowing how even tense that would be to play is odd because it's a very quick bow structure. So even the people playing the notes, it's very tense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really interesting choice to underscore, this intense moment.
Yeah. And I just, yeah, I've always liked the way it drops out. Like pretty
Same.
much the big moment is just the sound of the iceberg scraping against the ship is pretty
Mm-hmm.
much the score for that moment. Which,
And the time I can think of they're using brass is the moment when we see Victor Garber as Thomas Andrews at his desk. There's a lone, I think it's a trumpet note just going, "Mm." Yes. Yes. And
yeah.
it's that, and it's quiet. It's not,
Mm-hmm.
"Bam!" We don't
Well,
need
we do get those at the sinking. Bum bum
Yes.
bum 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 bum.
Yes. Very heavy use of brass there, but in this moment, it's an extremely restrained use, and it
Yeah.
works so well for the score because, as you pointed out, the sounds of the iceberg breaking the ship are drastic enough.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like that moment you're waiting for with a Titanic movie. You know it's coming, so.
Mhm. I have to say that having read the testimonies and read some of the books and seen A Night to Remember, and now, quote unquote, knowing that the right way was far less dramatic and that what really happened was more like quietly given orders at first and nobody panicked and it wasn't a thing. But I will also say that having seen A Night to Remember and the sinking filmed in that way, it is not as compelling.
Yeah.
It is
And
more accurate.
I feel bad for thinking that because I know
Same.
so many people on the internet will die on the hill that A Night to Remember is the superior Titanic movie. It's so
Yeah.
much better and blah blah blah. And I'm like,
Okay.
I'm not, yeah.
I'm not gonna fight you. I'm small. But there's two things at play for me. Number one, I love Ewan Stewart as First Officer Murdoch. I think he does a really good portrayal of him, and he has extremely good tense facial acting.
Mm.
Both in the Take Her to Sea scene, I think that he does a really good job at kind of bringing up sort of joy and pride in your work, as well as, that with Captain Smith just being able to pay attention while still being happy. But then during this scene, it's, there's not a lot of dialogue. There's, a little bit of yelling at the high starboard.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of yelling at the beginning, but there's not really a lot of hollering, yelling, screaming. All of the acting is people's faces and then him muttering mostly to himself. There's very little yelling, but I think that he does a really good job at evoking that tension of a person who can't actually do anything.
Right.
Like,
yeah,
gave the order.
Exactly. He does everything he can. Is it hard over?
Yes.
It is. Yes, sir. It's like,
yeah,
okay,
it's like,
well, then I just have to stand here and wait.
And I feel bad for Hitchens. Like, no, I just decided I was going to stop at the halfway point. Figured you couldn't be that serious, huh? It's like, no, I did what you told me to do, man.
But it's like you're so panicked in that moment. You just have to make sure. Like, is it?
Oh, yeah. I would have been doing the same thing. I think I would have asked 7 times.
Yeah.
I would have asked enough where you let go. It's like, well, now it's not. But, they do a really good job of conveying the tension, which I think was necessary. Because, again, having seen A Night to Remember and having... This also has to do with filmmaking of the 50s. So this is
very
not
different.
Yes. Not meant to be a direct comparison, but there's never a moment where they really do ramp up the tension. So when the sinking happens, it almost feels artificial in that the tension was never quite brought up to you. The stakes were never set out in the same way. And the budget simply wasn't as high. It didn't go as far. So they weren't able to have hundreds and hundreds of extras to really show the scope. It was just much more limited. And unfortunately, with all that working against them, you then have this multi-billion-dollar movie decades later that evokes this incredible tension and emotion. Because, like you said, I feel bad kind of being like, well, A Night to Remember me, but it simply is what it is. And it was extremely good for its time. But I
know, I was actually when I
Mhm.
finally got around to watching it, I was surprised at how well their practical effects look for the time. But they're miniatures and stuff. Like, you can tell they're a miniature, but I'm like,
Sure.
It still looks pretty good for the 50s,
It does. It looks way better than the movie they made in 1979, SOS Titanic. And I was 20 years in advance. They had 20 years to get ready, and they were still like, meh. But what if we put Madeline Astor in pigtails?
I love the 1996 one where it's like, I hear that James Cameron's making a Titanic movie. We got to hop on that before he does.
Let's go. Yeah, I feel bad for everyone that was involved with that one. It's kind of like, ooh, when that came out, was everyone involved just like, let's pretend this didn't happen. Somebody walk left. When, Larry, this is not meant to be a total 180, but I wanted to go back to something you'd said a little while ago, which is when you were talking about some of the things that people were getting wrong when you were listening to other episodes of the show and things that you were like, I want to talk about, this, or not to say that other people are wrong, but like, no, because I'm a person who likes Titanic, I happen to know X, Y, and Z. What are some of the things that like a couple of the big ones maybe that made you think like, I have to do my own show because we have got to fix this?
Well, excuse me. Most of the podcasts I came across, first of all, were hosted by men.
I was going to ask that, but I was trying to figure out the nice way to ask that.
Yeah.
But that's the best way. Thank you.
Yep. Most of these podcasts were hosted by men, and they just were ragging on it. And they just kept saying how this movie wasn't made for me. This movie wasn't made for us. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, that just got on my last nerve, because without fail, like, most of them would always say that. And it just drove me crazy, because to me, Titanic is a movie for literally everyone. And I felt like the only reason they were saying that was because there is a romance at the center of the fictional story. And that just got me so mad, because there's so much present in the story of Titanic, and even embedded within the love story. There's all these messages about life and love and perseverance and all these things that everyone was just apparently missing because it's a romance. So it's stupid, it's cheesy, it's Hollywood. There's really, it's all surface level. There's no real meat to this movie. It's just whatever. And that's what so many people were saying constantly. Like they wouldn't actually dig deeper into it. They just were talking about it for, the hype that it was, the, the pop culture-y parts of it and all the things that they find annoying and all this stuff, but they just weren't actually talking about the reasons why I love it and the reasons why I know so many other people love it and the real merit of the movie and the reasons why it has endured for so long. There's people just missed all of that, which was just driving me crazy. And I feel like people to this day still miss a lot of that stuff, which, you know, is one of the reasons, the big reason why I wanted to do the podcast. And I feel like there's still so much we haven't said and still so much to say, especially now that we're heading into we're into the back half of the movie now.
Yeah.
But yeah, but even so, like with a lot of the stuff in the first half, I feel like we touched on some stuff uh within the romance that some people may not have thought of before. We've gotten a lot of emails like that, which mission accomplished to me if we were able to have anybody see something in a different light. Yeah, that's
I
pretty
want
much the main thing. And
to.
just kind of like belittling the significance of the Titanic disaster as well.
Hmm.
Just people not really giving the power of that event enough credit either, like just not
Hmm.
getting anything about the movie, just like not understanding why it works and all the things it did well. So those are kind of the main things. But
I've talked about it a little bit on on my show before about the significance of specifically the romance in Titanic. I would love to talk about it because I know you talk about it on your show a little bit more because I think you're right. I think that there's a big significance people keep missing, and I always bring up how, especially if you were not a girl or young, not male person in the 90s and 2000, and those were your sort of media formative years, the dominant message for you was there is one standard of beauty. You must fit it. And if you don't, nothing else about you is important. Not your name, not your accomplishments, not your hopes, not your dreams, absolutely nothing. And
mm-hmm.
you see that, in early examples like the movie Grease, where, Danny doesn't look twice at Sandy once they're in front of the school again until she conforms to his image. You see that in She's All That. You see it, oh gosh, I can't remember. I think Raise Your Voice has a thing. I think almost any rom-com, she's the man, they all have these scenes where the woman character drastically changes for the male character. And it is a
Mm-hmm.
central narrative theme of almost every movie, TV show, and book series that was aimed at that sort of target audience. And then you have Titanic, which is one movie. I will admit, it is a singular movie, but it is a movie in which a woman changes not because she is required to, but because she sees an opportunity to become a more authentic version of herself. It's
Mm-hmm.
not, I want to be hot for this guy. It's not like she's like, well, I found out that the latest thing in third class fashion is to do X, Y, and Z. She's not changing who she is. And that was a really important example that, as you said, I think a lot of people just.
Yeah, she's being set free. it's
Mm-hmm.
it's everything she's already had within her getting to be released because of her relationship with this guy. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what kind of makes it so beautiful and appealing, I think, is that it's like Jack and Rose, they seem very balanced, like one of the most
Mm-hmm.
balanced couples that you could have in a major blockbuster like this,
Agree.
especially in different ways as well, with the way they both physically save each other at one point. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
Cameron has, Rose wield that axe and get down there to save her man in this moment, just as he saved her from going overboard. And there's just things like that that I feel like are very overlooked and not as appreciated for a movie as big as Titanic to
Mm-hmm.
have done. Um, And I think that also says something about its staying power as well. I feel like there's a lot of um there might be some subconscious stuff going on there for people who, you know, don't get it or think they don't get it or don't think twice about why it's lasted so long. I think it's just kind of funny. I feel like there's a lot of different things at play.
Mhm. Another thing that I find interesting about this is another sort of trope reversal is that, and you see it a lot with
I think I know where you're going with this. I don't know. Are you gonna say like the manic pixie
no,
dream
I
boy
wasn't
thing?
actually.
Yeah.
I was gonna bring up that you see it with Christian Grey, you see it with Edward Cullen, the trope of the rich, hot, jealous boyfriend being attractive, like
Hmm.
having that person be the love interest. And in this case, he is decidedly the villain of the entire story.
Right. Yep.
And I found that really, really interesting. And I find that interesting more so as an adult and rethinking about these things. As I like watching film reviews, and I've been watching some lately for Twilight. And I saw one my boyfriend showed me for 50 Shades of Grey, which I've read part of the first book and I was laughing too hard to continue. So I never quite finished. It's so, speaking of bonkers, that is bonkers. It is wild. I don't, writing, I never want to be that person that's like, maybe you should pick a different hobby, but maybe she should have picked a different hobby. Um, but that trope is really present. And I mean, it's also kind of in like going back to Greece with like Danny Zuko and all these, the men who are in a privilege where they're attractive and they have the money and they can act however they want. And for some reason, that excuses everything. And I liked again how Titanic was like, well, no, that's just kind of being a jerk. And you
Hmm.
shouldn't like that. That's not good. And it shows it as being what it is, abusive.
Now, see, there are still people to this day, I still see people saying how Cal wasn't that bad. Like, Rose could have had money if she stayed with him. Like,
Sure.
blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
Like, and I'm just like,
You're not wrong.
did we watch the same movie? Because that is absolutely insane to watch Titanic and then come to that conclusion.
Agree.
And not only that, too, I've noticed more and more so many people love to paint Rose as the villain.
Which is wild.
I see this all the time. I've seen so many viral posts. I mean, posts with like hundreds and thousands of likes of people laughing and agreeing and being like, oh my God, I thought I was the only one that thought this. She's the worst, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, isn't that funny? Like this one blockbuster where this woman is the heroine and the person we follow the whole time. Like, this is what we're gonna say this. You know what I mean? It's always Rose killed Jack by not letting him on the wood. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, really? Hmm. Why do we automatically think that and not what was the case, which was Jack made a decision in that moment that
Yeah.
he's gonna pass his torch over to her, and this is the way it has to be.
Yeah.
It's not Rose killed him because she's selfish and couldn't make room. I'm like, what? I'm
She
like,
didn't
how?
she
It's
didn't kick
like,
him in the head.
and I'm like, how are we twisting it to be this way?
If she
Um,
had climbed onto the wood, turned Jack around, put him in a sleeper hold, and pushed him underwater, I would say, yeah, she killed him. She killed him right in front of us. But she did not do that. Unless
no,
there's a version of the movie that you've seen that I haven't, where she
no.
just like brutally KOs him. Okay. I think that's a fascinating argument, and I think you touched right on it, which is that it is a woman. It nope, it's a movie that highlighted a young woman's story, and she came out on top
Mhm.
without a man. And a lot of people can't hang with that. And by a lot of people, I mean a lot of angry dudes out there.
Yeah, it's just so crazy to me because I feel like people almost like they harp on Jack as a
Hmm.
character way more than Rose. Like, I feel like some people think that Jack is kind of the main character of Titanic because all you ever hear about is Jack, 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 this, Jack, that, Jack could have lived, blah, blah, blah. Like, you don't really hear as many people talking about Rose, I don't think.
But I think the reason that happens is because Rose is telling the story. If I tell a story about this interview we're having right now, I'm going to reference your existence far more than my own, just because I'm
Mm,
the narrator of the story. I
true.
don't need to constantly be like, and then I was there and I was there. Remember, I was in the conversation. Yeah, we know you're telling that you were there. So I would mention that you were there more often than Brittany said, or she brought up. I
Hmm.
would just mention you more often. And I think that's kind of the thing here. It's like Rose doesn't need to mention her own name as many times. She's the narrator of the story. It's kind of implied that she's there. And like obviously there's some scenes where she's not, but like I can see where some people would make that argument because his name is mentioned more often. But in the grand scheme of things, I'm like, if you actually watch the movie, it is her story. She is the central narrator in both time periods.
Yeah. Hmm.
It's an interesting argument. I think just as you said, people find reasons to harp on this movie because it was and still is in many ways showing attention to storylines and plot lines and tropes that are very uncommon.
Yeah. And I think that's I've said it before on our podcast,
Mhm.
but Titanic is actually underrated. So many people say it's overrated. But I'm like, if you call it overrated, yet you completely overlook everything good about it, and by calling it overrated, you're underrating it. Like, you know what I mean? So,
It's
uh,
like a
yeah.
weird catch 22 they came up with themselves.
Yep, it's very strange. So, but yeah, I feel like people really they're just quick to write it off as cheesy without actually examining it and thinking about all the things that it actually because cliche is another word they throw out all the time to describe Titanic, and I'm like, okay, but a lot of things it did aren't actually when you compare it to other romances and other, movies of a similar nature. Um, so yeah.
It is, it's interesting to see how opinions, not to necessarily say that they're changing, but I feel as though as, time goes on and a general sort of like shift in the way that we consume media is happening and a shift in the way that people are producing media, there's a lot of, lines and tropes and jokes that were extremely common in the 90s that you wouldn't be able to toss into anything now. It's inappropriate. And because of that, we're seeing more things told from the female perspective. We're seeing more movies and TV being framed around like a non-traditional narrator. So it's becoming a little bit easier to see those counterpoints. But again, Titanic came out during a time when that wasn't super common, and it was groundbreaking in its own way at the time, as you said, in so many ways. Some of them really big, like you spent how much money on a movie, and some of them in other small, subtle ways, like reversing the power dynamic in the relationship.
Yeah, like so many images as well, like we've mentioned on the podcast,
Mm-hmm.
in the car scene when, Jack is laying on top of Rose and like she's kind of cradling him. I feel like that's something you don't really see, especially in a giant blockbuster like that. It was something, and even just Jack being of the body type that he is,
Mm-hmm.
that's not necessarily the big male lead, he was softer and, didn't really look the way you would necessarily expect a leading man to look at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And even to this day, still with like all the superheroes out there, he still doesn't totally fit the the thing really, but I mean there definitely is an appeal for, people who look like young Leonardo DiCaprio these days. But uh
Justin Bieber's a pretty good indicator that has remained popular.
yeah, yeah. Timothy Chalamet as well is
Yep,
another
Tom
one.
Holland.
Yep. But yeah, for sure. But that was it was doing a lot of different things at the time, and I feel
Mm-hmm.
like uh a lot of people just reacted a certain way to
That's true.
everything Titanic was doing.
You're in your show as of now. So we're in March, unfortunately, but I think this episode's probably going to be coming out in like May, April, because my life is insane.
Right.
But where in approximately, if things go according to plan, where in the movie will you be by like May-ish?
If we can stay on a good schedule, we have this episode that I just finished editing,
Mm-hmm.
like the main edit of it, and then after this, I'm going to listen back, cut it down more. It's a big process. Um, we really have to try to stay on top of how long we talk because this episode that
Yes,
I'm editing, we spoke for 3 hours. And
I've done that.
so I cut it down to 2 hours. And now, so I cut out a whole hour of talking. And now when I listen back, I'm going to cut out even more
More.
unnecessary stuff that I maybe didn't notice that first pass through, you know?
Yup.
So it's probably going to end up being an hour and a half. So I got maybe another half hour to cut out. So that's
I'm gonna
that
listen to
that
the whole thing, so.
well, thank you. But that is a process that I have to, make sure I have the time to do.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then there is also like the research aspect
Hmm.
of it. I have to make sure I have time to sit down and do my whole college research project vibe with it, where I cross-reference all my different books and
Hmm.
look up interviews and do whatever to try to get everything. And so there's that. And then yes, me and Ethan working with each other's schedules. He has like this crazy work schedule now
Hmm. Of
since the last time we were recording. So, uh yeah, so
course.
it's a process. But we do have our next episode already ready to go because we recorded it literally 2 years ago and I've just
Nice.
it's just been sitting on my hard drive. But so we have that ready to go, like maybe I want to say probably like we'll give this one I just edited like a week or two, and then post that one in like the one from 2 years ago in like 2 weeks after that. And then
So we're in the end of March now for anyone who's paying attention with
so
me.
maybe if we somehow could do like every 2 weeks an episode, maybe that might be a thing that we could try to stay on now that we have like that grace period of this episode that's already done.
Right.
Um,
I love a
you know,
backlog. It's such a nice
yeah,
feeling.
maybe we can kind of get on top of things. And we try to record more than one scene in a session.
Sure. I mean,
So,
while you have the time.
yeah, we try to do that to not spend too much time because these scenes really are, a 3 minute scene or a 5 minute scene.
Hmm.
So it shouldn't be that hard, but we still end up talking forever. Um,
Do
so
understand.
I think so because the next scene that we have ready to go is women and children first,
Okay.
which ends, I believe, that episode ends right around when Rose says, "I'd rather be his whore than your wife." Um,
This is a good scene.
yeah, so it ends like right around there.
Okay.
And um, so by May, I would think.
She's probably, I'm guessing we're probably getting about to where she's going to run into Jack. She may not be there yet.
Wait, running into Jack.
Well, not running
Wait,
into, but like she goes down to find him.
right. Well, because that's what she kind of that's when she leaves to do that. Is like
Yes.
right at that moment.
I'm trying to figure out if she's gonna get there, but it depends on where the scenes cut
I
themselves,
think I
obviously.
posted a picture of the DVD scene selection, which is what we were
Yeah.
basing it off of. But
Mm-hmm.
at this point, the DVD scene selection, the scenes get so long that
Yeah,
it's
that's
like
fair.
not accurate at all.
No,
Um,
that makes sense. You kind of have to start like making an
Splitting them
executive
up.
cut.
Yeah, we start looking at the Blu-ray scene selections
Makes
instead
sense.
because they're much more divided.
Huh,
Um,
didn't consider that. It's not
okay.
super it's not like the most important. I was just kind of curious because obviously when you're I mentioned Titanic minute, that's minute by minute.
Yeah.
But scenes are a little bit longer, and it's so interesting how fast the movie goes once it hits the iceberg. It just
Mm,
takes off.
yep. Yeah, I don't know where we'd be. We'd maybe be mm, honestly maybe like Rose getting into the lifeboat or something, maybe.
Oh, yeah. I guess it'll boil down to, again, where are the scenes splitting?
Yeah, and when how we're gonna schedule everything, but
Yeah. I was just curious in case anyone who was listening was wondering where they could go. Because the good news is by the time this comes out, there's going to be a really, really hefty backlog of the Titanic Scene by Scene podcast. So anyone that does go through, there's going to be 25 to 30 episodes by that point.
oh yeah, I think we have 25 now, I think so.
Okay.
Something,
Yeah, there'll be a lot.
somewhere around there. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
There already is.
There already is. There already is. You have done more than half of the movie, as we figured out, because we all know where the halfway point is.
I believe you may get your headlines, Mr. Ismay.
And then we go right into which is a little slot, isn't it? Which I love that line, but he also says it in one of the weirdest ways possible. So it's just like you swallowed 8 of those syllables, my friend.
Yeah, a lot
like,
of
Billy... sluts isn't. What?
Billy Zane's line readings are interesting. I love the way, like, again, with the way times change, I feel like people used to think that he was really bad in that movie a long time ago, and people thought he was just so corny and they hated his choices. But now we're at a time in society, I guess, where we just think he's great and we love it, and he's so ridiculous and it's wonderful and it's perfect.
I think it's the rise of the millennials, because we are extra. And
true.
And he's clearly extra, so we're very much, oh my gosh, I saw something that made me feel so freaking old the other day. I'm not even that old, but I think it was in the Our Titanic on Reddit, where someone was like, oh my god, loved Billy Zane's performance, he ate and left no crumbs. And I was just like, okay, I know what you meant by that because I got it, but I'm also really mad.
He ate and left no crumbs.
It's like, I love that, but I'm also so mad because this tells me that I am too old, because I didn't immediately know what that meant.
Oh my goodness.
They're right, though. We used to just call that, back in the day, guys, we used to just call that chewing the scenery. That was the old way of saying that.
Mm-hmm.
But now we say he ate and left no crumbs.
But it's still chewing.
It is still chewing. He really
evolved.
did.
It evolved.
It has, but I think all that we've learned is that we've evolved a greater appreciation for his performance. And I think as maybe people are becoming, the people who were not as warm on the film are becoming a little warmer. I hope, or just understanding why it's important to the cultural zeitgeist.
Yeah, I think people seeing it on the big screen helped a lot, because I can understand actually if someone who isn't that into a movie like Titanic, even though I personally think that if everybody actually opened their hearts to this movie, they would like it on some level, because it is made for anybody with a pulse, pretty much. I think that, oh God, what were we saying?
People have begun to appreciate it.
Right.
Is that what I was saying? Okay, cool.
Yeah,
it was
from seeing it on the big screen. I think I can understand if you're someone who maybe might not like, period pieces or the historical fiction or a romance or a disaster or whatever, right? I can imagine that if you were to sit at home and watch it on your phone or your computer or your TV, that it wouldn't necessarily hit you, the way James Cameron intended.
Right.
I know for me, watching it on a tube TV in 1998, 99 on VHS was fine. It still hit me. I still loved it, but I know that that's not going to be the case for everybody. And especially for a 3-hour movie like that. So I think if you can go and see it on like the biggest screen possible with the loudest sound possible, you will gain a better understanding and kind of understand why it popped off so much in the 90s and why it became the phenomenon that it did. And it kind of allows you to be able to time travel a little bit and put yourself in those people's shoes. And so I think, judging from reviews I've looked at on Letterboxd and all these other things, I feel like that is the effect that this re-release has had on the movie. And I was really sad just recently now when it left theaters, because now the hype has died down. No one's really reviewing it as much as they were when it was in theaters. And I've already started to see reviews start to lean a little bit more negative again already, because I'm sure there are people who missed out on seeing it in theaters, but now they're like, oh, I'll just check it out at home. And then it's already happening again. Of like, I don't get the hype, overrated. But all these people that did get to experience it came away with a really, strong impression and left really beautiful reviews. So I do think Titanic should be re-released in theaters as much as possible. Because that'll only help its legacy even more, I
Mhm.
think. Because a lot of the things people were saying were insane. There were a lot of former haters like proudly saying like, yes, I was a former hater, but now I've seen the light. And people saying crazy statements like, I believe within, a couple decades from now, Titanic is going to be in consideration for the greatest movie of all time after Citizen Kane. Like these people just saying crazy, amazing statements. And I'm like, well, that's what I mean. Hey, when you experience Titanic on the big screen, you're going to be walking away feeling very changed.
I have two stories, one of which is not actually mine. I saw a TikTok recently, which was like, I don't know how old the person filming was, but it was like the annoying voice, like, my sister and her friends going through the
Yep.
5 stages of
I
grief
saw
while
that. I
watching
saw that.
Titanic. It
Yep.
was it was amazing. If you've
I
not
saw
seen
that.
this, I will try. Please Google this. It is just these two girls literally going through the 5 stages of grief while watching Titanic and being emotional and excited. And when the movie ends, they're like, this movie changed my life. This just changed the whole way that I looked at love. And if I don't have a love like Jack and Rose, I don't want it.
Yep.
It was like, I love this. Um, and during the re-release, I ended up being able to go see the movie in theaters with a group of my friends, most of whom are my age, but one of whom, it's funny, I think she's like 26, but in my brain she's still 21 when I met her, so she's
Hmm.
like a child. But she, afterwards, we were talking and they were saying, they'd only ever seen clips of Titanic over the course of the years, not in any linear order. And this is the first time that I actually sat down and watched Titanic. And she looks me right in the eyes and goes, You know, I get it now.
Hmm.
I see now why we let James Cameron do whatever he wants. And it was like, I laughed a lot, but it was also like, that is often the reaction where it's like, oh, okay. Okay, that makes sense now.
Hmm.
And it's,
Yep.
as you were saying, it's being able to see it all put together and being able to understand that narrative for many, many people. That first experience is almost magic in its own way because it is a unique movie.
Yep. And it still looks beautiful.
It really does.
Oh my God, it looks so good. In the 4K 3D at Dolby Cinema was absolutely incredible. That was by far on this re-release like my best viewing of the movie. It just
Oh,
looked
nice.
so beautiful. It looked so current as well, like with it that pristine. It does not look like a 25-year
Yeah.
old movie.
There's a
Um,
vibrancy to all this. You're right, because when you do watch, movies from that time period, they're often not as graphically mastered, but you're right, there was a brilliance and a smoothness that made it look so much more modern than it was.
yeah, and I think we've talked about it a lot before on our pod, but it's like it happened at the perfect moment
Yeah.
with technology when it comes to filmmaking, where they were still willing to finance building a near full scale replica of the Titanic.
Yep.
But then CGI was just good enough to create what they needed to do in order to elevate the practical sets and, really just use the CGI sparingly, like where they needed
Hmm.
it to do things they couldn't do maybe with
Yeah.
practical effects, like, to actually make the ship sail and all
Sure.
this stuff. I mean, like they used the CGI where it was absolutely necessary, pretty much.
Hmm.
Whereas now we're just like super reliant on it for everything.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was just this perfect storm of how it all came together. And in the long run, it just helped it so much. And then as well with the style of filmmaking, it was just modern enough that looking back at it, it doesn't feel like a quote unquote old movie.
Mm-hmm.
But it also was made in the style and spirit of old Hollywood epics. So it's
Yes.
kind of like this perfect blend of the two where you can almost forgive a lot of the cornier stuff that people have issues with because, well, it's an old fashioned melodrama. Like
Yeah.
that's just part of the DNA. But at the same time, it gets away with it as well. And you can totally get, accept it because it still also feels modern enough that it doesn't feel old. Like, I can't explain it, but like, when you sit down to watch an old movie,
Mm-hmm.
you number one can tell that it's an old movie because of the style of filmmaking,
Mm-hmm.
because of the style of acting, because of the writing, because of just everything. Um, and you feel a little bit detached from it because it feels like it's from a different time.
Yeah.
But with Titanic, it kind of feels like it has one foot in each door,
Yeah.
and that kind
Mm-hmm.
of helps a lot. And I think that's what will help younger generations still be able to connect to it in the way that they probably wouldn't to, you know, actual old Hollywood movies.
Sure.
But
It is. There is just so much that the movie did right, and as you said, it got lucky in that way that it came out at right at the right time. Maybe if it came out 2, 3 years later, it wouldn't have been received in the same way. There's no way
Mhm.
of knowing. Obviously there's no way of knowing, but for what it's worth, it came out at exactly the right time. It hit a lot of the right notes for a lot of people, and I ask a lot of people, at least I did at the beginning when I started the show, it's like, what do you think makes this so popular? And then I realized I was just answering that question every episode. But there is no one way to answer it. We've touched on how many points in this discussion, and we could keep each other for 2.5 hours more going over the like repetitive merits of this movie because there's just so many.
Yeah,
And that's what's helping it keep on. And as you
endure.
said, what's
Yeah.
going to keep younger generations making TikToks about their younger sisters.
Oh my God. And not just that, but like TikTok edits
Oh my
and
God.
TikTok, all the, like we talked about this on our, oh God, on our 25th anniversary episode that I just edited. But
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned how I started to look up Titanic stuff on TikTok, and it's just insane how, like, I saw a Jack and Rose edit that was posted. Maybe it had been up for 15 days or so, and it had
Mm-hmm.
1.6 million likes, and now it has 1.8 million likes. And
That's so
I
many.
that's you know I in my experience on TikTok, a viral video to me on TikTok is over 100,000. Like if something has over 100,000 likes or something, I'm like, well, that's like a viral TikTok. This had 1.6 million likes in like 15 days. And I was like, this is insane. This is the power of Titanic. Like we all know that it's mainly teenagers who rule TikTok. And so for Jack and Rose edit to have that many likes in that little time, I was like, this is incredible. This is amazing. And the Jack Dawson tag, young Leo still has these kids in a chokehold too. But
Why am I not surprised?
yeah, it's crazy. And I was shocked as well to see that the Jack Dawson tag, the last time I checked, has 1.6 billion views on TikTok.
That was
So
billion with a B, right?
billion with a B. One,
I'm
1.6 billion people, or 1.6 billion times people have clicked the Jack Dawson tag to find thirst edits of young Leonardo DiCaprio in this movie. It's wild.
Oh man, this movie, it's almost like it's gonna go on and on.
Wow, kind of like the heart.
Well, women's hearts are deep oceans of secret. I have to say before I let you go, that is one of my least favorite movies and lines in the entire movie. I know
Oh,
some
the
people like it.
woman's heart. Yeah,
A
me
woman's
too.
heart is a deep ocean of secrets. Lady, be quiet.
Yeah, but Old Rose, I've said before, like Old Rose is probably the only aspect of the movie. Her and Brock sometimes are like the only two aspects where it's like, this is a little the dialogue could have been a little better there, but and the performances as well. Poor Gloria Stewart, rest in
I
peace.
agree. She is my least favorite part of that movie. I'm sorry, Gloria Stewart. I don't hate you. I just don't think you were believable as old Rose. I'm sorry. I'm
Yeah.
sure you're really nice. You were, I'm sure.
Oh no. Yeah, that's my mom's
Oops.
biggest problem with the movie too. Just yeah.
Yeah.
The
I mean,
line
that
the line reading of A Woman's Heart is a Deep Ocean of Secrets as well. It's just there's really no way to kind of make that sound natural and conversational.
no, nope. I was gonna give it a try, and I think it's gonna sound just as crazy. It's like you can't even say that in any other conversation. It's like, well, why won't you let me know the Wi-Fi password? Because a woman's heart is a deep ocean of secrets to me. Like it just sounds insane in every context. Ugh. All right. Brittany, thank you so much for coming on and talking even more about Titanic, even though you were just talking about how you already did a lot of talking about Titanic, and now I have to go listen to yourself talk about Titanic more.
That's my life.
Thumbs the brakes. Awesome. Well, if you guys are not already listeners, you should go check out Titanic Scene by Scene. I will link that and everything in the description box so that you can find it easier. But I'm hoping that most people who listen to the show are already keen listeners and will just be mad that I'm telling them stuff they already know.
Oh, well, thank you.
Well, thank you
This
so
was
much
so
again.
much fun. Yeah, thank you.
I'm glad.
I'm so glad
I'm going to
to
be eagerly looking out for all your new episodes.
Oh, thank you. Hopefully we can stay on top of a schedule. That's definitely a New Year's
Whatever.
resolution of ours, I think. So,
I'm sure you'll be fine. But again, thank you so much for
thank
coming.
you.
Thank you so much for Brittany for coming on. I've been a huge fan of her and her show for such a long time, and you should go ahead and follow her and the Titanic Scene by Scene podcast. You can find her on Twitter at Brittany Butler. That's IBrittanyButler. I will link that in the description box. And you can also find the show Titanic Scene by Scene on Facebook.com/Titanic Scene by Scene, all one word. Instagram.com/Titanic by Scene, all one word, and on twitter.com with the same username, Titanic by Scene. Go ahead and check them out. Listen to them wherever you find your podcast. Follow Brittany, and I will see you next time. Bye.